The granddaughter said, "Grandma, you smell old." Everyone giggled. And a year later, she came to my house to ask me to spend the night. I smiled, opened the door, and showed her what was left in her place. Stay with me until the very end to find out how the story ends. We look forward to your comments and thoughts on the story. They sat at the table, all of them. My daughter, her husband, their 3 children, and me. It was Christmas Eve, and the fireplace was crackling in the background, its soft light casting a golden hue over the plates and silverware. I had cooked all morning, just like I always did. My hands ached from peeling, chopping, stirring, but no one seemed to notice. No one ever did. The meal was almost over when it happened. My granddaughter, Lily, 16 and full of herself, wrinkled her nose as I reached across the table to pass her the mashed potatoes. "Grandma," she said loudly, waving her hand in front of her face, "you smell like old age." There was a beat of silence, the kind that lingers in the air like steam on a mirror. Then someone snorted. A giggle escaped. Soon they were all laughing. Not cruelly, perhaps, but enough to pierce the skin. My daughter chuckled behind her wine glass. Even my son-in-law let out a muted laugh, shaking his head as if to say, "Kids these days." I smiled. I always do when I don't know what else to do. I patted Lily's hand gently and replied, "That's the smell of lavender and dust, sweetheart. You'll understand one day." But inside, I shrank. Not from the insult itself, no. I'm no stranger to thoughtless words. I've lived long enough to see how easily they fall from careless lips. No, it was the laughter that followed, the dismissiveness, the way no one thought to say, "Hey, that wasn't kind." I was invisible in my own chair. Later that night, I sat alone by the fireplace, the embers dying down, the smell of cinnamon and roasted meat still in the air. My eyes wandered over the room, the tiny details I kept just for them. The holiday mugs, the hand-sewn stockings, the photo albums lined neatly on the shelf. And yet, I was simply a background character in their holiday, the furniture with feelings. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I made tea, took out a notebook, and began writing. I didn't know what I was writing exactly. A memory? A letter? A story? All I knew was that something inside me had shifted, slightly, subtly, but enough. Because sometimes it only takes one sentence, tossed casually into the air like confetti, to make someone start packing away parts of their heart, quietly, one drawer at a time. And that's exactly what I began to do that night. The next morning, the house was quiet again. Christmas was over, the mess already cleaned, the laughter stored away like old ornaments. I sat in the kitchen with my coffee, listening to the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. No one else was awake yet. No one ever was when I needed them to be. I stared out the window at the backyard. The frost covered everything in silver. The swing my husband built, the bench where I used to read to Lily when she was small, before she discovered that I was no longer someone worth listening to. Back then, she'd curl up beside me, her head against my arm, asking me about the past like it was a fairy tale. She used to call me Grandma Lavender. Now I was just old. I stood and walked to the living room, still wearing my slippers, and opened the drawer in the end table beside my chair. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten, faded, tied with a ribbon. My late husband's words. I hadn't read them in years. I took the top letter, unfolded it slowly. His handwriting still made my heart ache. "Don't let them forget who you are," he once wrote. "Don't disappear just to keep the peace." I placed the letter back gently, closed the drawer, and turned the key. That was the first drawer I closed that winter, literally and otherwise. After everyone left that day, I packed away the holiday decorations without a word. I folded the stockings, boxed up the ornaments, and labeled the container not Christmas, as I always did, but simply past. Then I carried it to the attic and left it there. Over the next few weeks, I began to move through my days like a quiet tide, steady, unnoticed, but always pulling something away with me. I didn't stop answering their calls, I just stopped starting them. I still sent cards, but not the long handwritten ones, just store-bought ones with a name scribbled at the bottom. I smiled at the right times, nodded when expected, but something inside had begun to retreat. It wasn't punishment, it wasn't revenge, it was self-preservation. I started lighting candles for myself instead of for guests. I read books again, not for distraction, but for depth. I baked, but only enough for one. And I realized, you don't have to yell to disappear. Sometimes you just lock one drawer and keep going. Winter passed slowly that year. The snow came and went, and so did the calls, short, distracted, often about things that didn't matter. My daughter would ask how I was, but never wait for the real answer. My son-in-law would wave behind her on the video screen, already walking away. Lily never came to the phone at all. I didn't mind. At least that's what I told myself. And maybe that was true. For a while. One afternoon in early spring, I went to the mirror and stared at my reflection. The same face stared back. Soft lines from too much smiling, tired eyes from too little sleep, silver hair that refused to stay in place. I touched my cheek and thought, "This is the smell of old age you couldn't stand, isn't it, Lily?" Then I smiled. A real one. Small, but not bitter. Not anymore. Because something had changed. Not out there, but in here. I no longer waited for approval. I no longer tried to be anyone's cozy background or sentimental wallpaper. I began to live in color again. For me. I pulled out the red coat I hadn't worn in years. The one they always said was too loud. I wore it to the market. I walked slower than I used to, but I held my head higher. I bought flowers for myself every Sunday. Tulips, then lilacs, then peonies. Each week, something new bloomed in my kitchen, even if no one else ever saw it. At the library, I started volunteering on Thursdays, reading to children who didn't ask why my hands shook or why I took my time turning pages. They just listened and smiled and thanked me. One little boy hugged me after a reading and said, "You smell like my grandma, like cookies and stories." I blinked and smiled again. That smile stayed with me all the way home. That night, I wrote in my journal, "When someone tells you that you smell like time, remind them what time brings: warmth, memory, and strength." I tore out the page and tucked it into the old cookie tin where I kept clippings and keepsakes. The tin Lily used to sneak candy from when she thought I wasn't looking. She hadn't been by since Christmas. I didn't expect her to. Not yet. But I'd already started preparing something for the day she did. Not out of spite, not for drama. Just so she'd understand that even the softest women leave footprints when they finally walk away. Spring gave way to the kind of early summer I always loved. The kind where the breeze smelled like cut grass and warm soil, and the birds outside my window made more conversation than my own family. I started waking earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted the stillness before the world got loud. It was in that quiet that I felt most like myself. I began rearranging the house, not for anyone else, just for me. I moved the old sewing table closer to the window where the morning light poured in like honey. I boxed up old knickknacks, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed to surround myself with things that held no joy. I wasn't erasing my life. I was editing it. Each drawer I opened, each photograph I dusted, was a small reckoning. I found birthday cards from Lily, back when she still signed them with hearts. Crayon drawings from when she'd call me her best friend. A note once tucked under my pillow. "Don't ever grow old, Grandma. I want you to stay just like this forever." I didn't cry. I just folded the note and placed it back. I knew she was still in there somewhere, that little girl. But I also knew the difference between who we were and who we are. People change, and when they do, sometimes they don't notice who they leave behind in the process. I never told my daughter what Lily said at Christmas. I never told anyone, actually, because what would they say? That it was just a joke? That I was being too sensitive? I could already hear the soft apology with sharp edges. You know how teenagers are. But I didn't want apologies. I wanted awareness. I wanted someone to say, that must have hurt, and mean it. No one did. So I stitched that moment into myself. One more thread in the long, invisible fabric women carry through their lives. And I carried it with grace. Some days were harder than others. I'd see other grandmothers walking hand in hand with their granddaughters, and something would ache in my chest. But then I'd come home, make myself tea, and sit in my rearranged living room where every corner reflected me, just me. And I'd breathe again. The house was quieter than it used to be, but for the first time in years, it finally felt like it was mine. The phone rang less and less, first weekly, then monthly, and now, not at all. I used to wait for it. I'd glance at it between chores, make excuses for why they hadn't called, busy schedules, school exams, life, but as time passed, I stopped checking. The silence that once stung became something I folded into, like an old shawl over tired shoulders. Familiar, soft, manageable. But silence, like time, doesn't stay empty. It grows things. One afternoon, I stood at the kitchen sink washing a single teacup. Just one. It struck me how odd that felt. How different from the past, when I'd wash after family dinners, the sink full of plates and laughter echoing down the hallway. Now it was only water and my own breathing. I looked out the window and saw the garden I'd abandoned years ago. Overgrown, wild. But something about the way the sun hit the weeds made me step outside barefoot, apron still on. I crouched in the dirt, fingers sinking into the soil, and began to pull. It started with the dead lavender. Ironic, I know. Then the brittle marigolds. I tugged, trimmed, turned the earth, and by the end of the day, there was space again. Raw, empty space waiting for something new. I planted tulip bulbs the next morning. I wasn't sure they'd take, but that wasn't the point. That week, I painted the porch swing. I oiled the hinges on the gate. I fixed the wind chime that had long since lost its song. Little things, quiet things, but they made the air feel lighter. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote my name in cursive on a blank piece of paper. Just my name. No mom, no grandma, just me. Margaret Ann Hale. It felt strange and beautiful, like reclaiming a part of myself that had gone dormant. I pressed that paper between the pages of my favorite book and tucked it away in the drawer next to my bed. Not as a declaration, but as a reminder. I was still here. I still mattered, even if no one else said it out loud. By the end of the week, I had rearranged not just my house, but the way I moved inside it. I no longer sat near the door waiting for visitors. I sat by the window instead, where things still bloomed. And in that silence, something inside me did too. Spring turned into summer, and with it came a new stillness. Heavier, warmer, the kind that settled in the corners of the house like dust. I stopped setting an extra place at the table. I stopped baking in batches. I stopped expecting the doorbell to ring. There was a time when Sundays meant noise, footsteps on the porch, laughter in the hallway, the smell of too many shoes left by the door. Lily used to run through the house like a flash of light, her voice bouncing off the walls, her arms wrapping around me like I was her whole world. But that was another lifetime. And like most lifetimes, it faded without anyone noticing when it ended. One Sunday, out of habit, I made an extra plate, just in case. Roast chicken, green beans, and the cornbread Lily used to call cloud bread when she was small. I waited until the food cooled, then packed it into containers and slid it into the fridge. That was the last time I cooked for someone who never came. I took a walk that evening through the neighborhood. Kids rode bikes, dogs barked behind fences, sprinklers hissed and rotated in lazy arcs. I passed by a young couple pushing a stroller, their baby gurgling at the sky. The woman smiled at me. Not out of pity, but real kindness. It startled me. I smiled back. When I got home, I wrote in my notebook, "Loneliness isn't silence. It's remembering the sound of someone's voice and realizing it lives only in your memory now." The next morning, I boxed up Lily's old toys. The dolls, the puzzles, the plush bear she once refused to sleep without. I placed the box in the attic, where so many of my memories already lived. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just let go. A week later, a neighbor's teenage daughter knocked on my door. She was selling raffle tickets for her school. I invited her in for lemonade. We talked about books, music, her dreams of becoming a writer. When she left, she hugged me. I stood by the door for a long while after she was gone. It wasn't Lily. It never would be. But I realized something. Sometimes life doesn't bring people back. It brings different people forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Or at least enough to keep the garden blooming. Enough to keep the teapot warm. Enough to remind me that I still had things left to give, just not to those who had stopped reaching for them. One morning in late July, I walked past the mirror in the hallway and caught my reflection. The light from the window behind me softened the lines on my face, but they were still there. Earned, not regretted. My hair had grown longer than usual, untamed and silver like wild lace. I leaned in, curious, not judging, just observing. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the drawer beneath the mirror and took out the small bottle of lavender water. It was half full, the label worn from time. The same scent Lily had once flinched from, the one that made the entire room laugh. I uncapped it, held it to my wrist, and breathed in deeply. Time, memory, soft pillows, folded letters, warm laps and lullabies. That's what it smelled like. Not decay, not irrelevance, just a woman who had lived and remembered how to live. I dabbed a little on my neck, not for anyone else, just for me. The scent followed me into the kitchen, into the garden, and back into the living room. It wrapped itself around me like a shawl of invisible comfort, something sacred and completely mine. I didn't need to justify it anymore. I didn't need to shrink from their laughter. That evening, I sat on the porch swing, red coat beside me, tea in hand, the garden quietly humming its summer song. The wind was soft, the sunset kind. I watched as petals from the peonies I'd planted months ago began to fall, not in surrender, but in rhythm, nature's gentle way of letting go. I opened my journal again and wrote, "Let them laugh, let them forget, let them go. I will still be here, blooming." It was strange how peace crept in, not like thunder, but like light slipping under a door. And with that peace came something else, clarity.
I realized I didn't miss the people who never checked in. I missed the version of them I once knew, the Lily who whispered secrets in my ear, not the one who wrinkled her nose at my scent, the daughter who asked how I slept, not the one who texted only on holidays. But mourning a memory is different from mourning a person, and I was finally ready to stop mourning. I was no longer waiting for someone to come home. I had come home to myself, and in the air around me, faint, steady, the lavender lingered, not as a reminder of age, but as a quiet anthem of endurance. By August, even the silence had taken on a rhythm. Morning tea, a walk through the garden, a book by noon, the occasional neighbor waving from the sidewalk. My world had become smaller, but also clearer. Everything I allowed in now had to deserve its place.
I stopped waiting for birthdays to come with calls. Mine passed quietly. A lemon tart I baked for myself, a soft candle flickering on the windowsill, the sound of wind through the screen door. It was enough. Almost. I checked my phone just once that day, just to see. No missed calls, no messages. I powered it off and slipped it into the drawer beside my chair. There was something freeing in letting it rest, like setting down a weight that had pressed into my chest for too long. I didn't cry. There were no dramatic sighs or slammed doors, just the quiet understanding that this was what life had become. Not cruel, not tragic, just real. The next morning, I walked to the post office to mail a birthday card. Not for me, of course, for Eleanor, the neighbor's little girl. She liked butterflies and shiny stickers, and she always stopped to wave when I passed by her front yard. That kind of joy deserved to be noticed, remembered.
When I got home, I found a package by my door. No note, no return address. Inside was a book, second-hand, spine cracked, pages soft from use. Tucked into the front cover was a sticky note with one sentence. "You always said stories matter. I finally believe you." No name, no signature. But I knew the handwriting. Lily. I sat down slowly, the book cradled in my lap like something delicate. My eyes scanned the page again and again, not for meaning, but for intention. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even acknowledgement. But it was something. A spark. A crack in the ice. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't imagine hugs or reunion speeches. Instead, I placed the book on my nightstand. Not to forget, but to remember. Quietly. Carefully. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt. Some just need to be stood beside, with a willingness to wait and see if the other person steps forward too. And so, I waited, not with hope, not with bitterness, just with room. I began clearing out the guest room in late September, not because I expected anyone, but because something inside me needed to breathe. The bed had been covered with old blankets, half-folded laundry I never got around to putting away, and a few dusty boxes marked later. But later, I had come to learn, never knocks. So I opened the boxes one by one. Inside, memories lay tucked in tissue paper, a photo album with fading edges, a chipped porcelain figurine Lily gave me when she was 8, and a scarf she left behind the last time she stayed over. It still held her perfume, faint and distant, like a song half-remembered. I pressed it to my face, then folded it carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and let the air move through the room again. I opened the windows. The curtains fluttered. I changed the sheets, fluffed the pillows, dusted the corners, not out of obligation, and certainly not out of preparation. It was something quieter, a gesture to myself, a space that didn't need to serve, just to exist. Clean, soft, peaceful. That night, I lit a candle in the guest room and left the door open. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it was holding its breath. People say that, when someone is gone, you should pack away the reminders. But I found that it's not always about erasing their presence. Sometimes it's about making space for who they might still become, if they ever return. I didn't expect her to come. I didn't expect anyone. But I liked knowing the room was there, should she need it. And if she never did, that was all right too. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the early autumn lights settle on the porch rail. The neighborhood kids had gone back to school, their chatter replaced with the crunch of leaves under hurried feet. I used to walk Lily to school when she was little, her hand in mine, her backpack bouncing as she skipped beside me. She used to ask me why the leaves changed colors. I used to say, because even trees need to let go sometimes. Letting go. The phrase used to sound like abandonment. Now it felt like release. So I left the guest room ready, not for her, not for anyone else, but for whatever came next. It was early evening when it happened. I remember because the sky outside was the color of bruised peaches, that in-between hour when the sun hesitates and everything feels suspended. I was in the kitchen, placing 2 warm slices of peach pie into a glass container, one for now, one for tomorrow. And then, the doorbell rang. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one came without texting first these days, and most had stopped doing even that. I wiped my hands, smoothed down my cardigan, and walked slowly to the door. No rush, no flutter in my chest, just quiet curiosity. When I opened it, there she was. Lily. She looked different, not in the way time makes someone older, but in the way real life reshapes a person's posture. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with something softer than makeup. Her clothes hung a little loose, her hair pulled into a messy knot that once would have horrified her. And in her hand, a backpack. "Hi, Grandma," she said, almost too softly. I stood there a moment, not frozen, just still. I thought about every version of her I had known. The child with blueberry-stained cheeks, the teen with quick words and quicker judgment, the girl who wrinkled her nose at me and made the whole room laugh. And yet, here she was. "Hi," I said gently, stepping aside. She hesitated, just for a second, then walked in like someone returning to a dream they never thought they'd need again. She glanced around the living room, at the familiar furniture, the lamp that still leaned slightly, the framed photos that hadn't moved in years. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked. "Just for a bit. I didn't know where else to go." I nodded slowly. "I figured as much," I said, not unkindly. She started to speak, maybe to explain, but I raised a hand and smiled. "No need," I said. "Your room is just down the hall." Her eyes widened slightly. "You kept it?" I didn't answer. I simply walked toward the kitchen, letting her follow the silence. And when she reached the doorway of the guest room, she paused, because waiting for her, folded neatly on the pillow, was the scarf she'd left behind all those months ago, the one that still faintly smelled like her, and maybe a little like lavender. She said nothing, and I said nothing in return. Some moments don't need words.
She didn't speak much that night. After placing her bag gently in the corner of the room, Lily came to the kitchen and sat at the table, not with confidence, not with familiarity, but with a strange mix of guilt and need. I didn't offer questions. I just sliced the peach pie and slid a plate in front of her. She stared at it like it was a memory. Then she picked up her fork. "Still tastes the same," she whispered, almost to herself. I smiled, not at the compliment, but at the way her voice cracked slightly. There are certain truths that live in the tremble of a sentence, things people won't say out loud but still mean with all their heart. After she ate, she helped me with the dishes without being asked. It was clumsy, the way she passed the plates, how she wiped them too fast, but it was something. When we finished, we didn't return to the living room. Instead, she lingered near the hallway, her fingers trailing across the edge of the wall like she was touching old air. "I haven't been back since Christmas," she said. I nodded once, still not pushing. The last thing a bruised heart needs is a spotlight. She looked down. "You didn't call or text, not even on my birthday." I raised my eyes to her gently. "Neither did you." Her mouth opened, then closed, and in that tiny silence, the weight of a year settled between us like dust. We both knew what had been said back then. We both knew what hadn't. But I also knew, deeply, certainly, that sometimes the apology is not in the words. It's in the showing up. And tonight, she had shown up. "I didn't think you'd still want me here," she said finally, her voice small. "Wanting you here and needing distance are not the same thing," I replied. I needed space, not absence. She looked at me then, really looked, as if she saw someone she hadn't known existed. Not the old woman who smelled of lavender, not the quiet background figure, but a woman who had kept going long after being forgotten. Later that night, as I passed her room, I saw the light still on. Her shadow moved slowly across the wall. I paused but didn't knock. Some nights aren't for fixing. They're just for being, and that was enough. I woke before the sun, habit mostly, years of early risings to make breakfast for a house full of people long gone. My body still moved with that rhythm, even if the seats at the table remained empty most days, but not today. I moved quietly through the kitchen, careful not to stir the floorboards too much. The kettle hissed gently as I watched the sky lighten beyond the curtains. A soft blush of dawn peeked over the trees. I took out 2 mugs instead of 1. Lily appeared just as the tea was ready. Her hair was still messy, her sweatshirt too big for her frame. But something about her face looked lighter. Maybe from sleep, or maybe from knowing she was safe again. She sat down slowly, almost as if asking for permission with each movement. I slid the mug toward her and smiled. "No sugar," she said, surprised. "You remembered." "I remember more than you think." We sat like that for a while, the quiet not awkward anymore, just comfortable, familiar, like the space between songs on an old record. "I don't know why I said what I said," she began, voice low. "At Christmas, I guess I thought it was funny or edgy, or maybe I was just trying to be someone else." I sipped my tea. "I don't need an apology," I said softly, "but I do need honesty." She looked up at me then, really looked. "I was embarrassed to be near you," she whispered. "Not because of you, because of what other people might think. You were so gentle, so slow, so different. And I hated that others saw me as the girl with the old grandma. I wanted to seem cooler, sharper, louder." She paused. "But now, after everything I've been through, I wish I had someone gentle, someone slow, someone who remembers." Her words hung in the air, trembling like leaves before a fall. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. "You still do," I said. She didn't cry. Neither did I. But in that silence, something inside both of us softened, like winter giving way to spring, not with thunder, but with melting. She helped me make breakfast that morning. Eggs, toast, sliced fruit. Nothing fancy, but we stood side by side at the stove, shoulder to shoulder, like 2 women rebuilding a house without saying a word about the cracks in the foundation. And as the sunlight spilled onto the floor, I realized sometimes the mending begins not with an apology, but with the courage to stay through the morning. Later that afternoon, Lily asked if she could go up to the attic. It surprised me. No one had been interested in the attic in years, not since she was a child hunting for forgotten Christmas ornaments or old board games. But now, standing at the foot of the stairs, she looked almost hesitant, as if stepping into that dusty space might stir more than cobwebs. "Are you looking for something?" I asked. She shrugged. Maybe just something real." I handed her the key. The stairs creaked under her weight, and for a moment I stood alone in the hallway, listening to the sounds of time being reopened. Slow footsteps, a click of a box lid, the rustle of old paper. She stayed up there a long time. When she finally came down, her cheeks were flushed, her hands smudged with dust, and in her arms, a small cardboard box with my handwriting on the side, "Lily's Things." She set it on the coffee table and sat down beside me without a word. One by one, she took out the contents: a tiny knitted hat she wore as a baby, a school certificate from 2nd grade, her first birthday candle wrapped in tissue, and then, at the very bottom, a drawing. Crayon on construction paper. Faded, but still bright. It was of me. Stick figure grandma holding a heart-shaped cookie. Above it, in crooked letters, "Grandma is the best smell in the world." Her fingers trembled as she held it. "I don't remember making this," she said. "But I do," I replied. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. "I was awful to you." "No," I said softly. "You were young, and growing up hurts, especially when we think we have to push away what makes us feel safe just to fit in." She nodded slowly. "I didn't know you kept all this," she whispered. "I kept it because I knew one day you'd come looking, maybe not for the things, but for who you used to be." And just like that, she leaned into me, rested her head against my shoulder, and we sat together. 2 women, 2 lifetimes wrapped around one box of memories. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to, because sometimes Love doesn't sound like forgiveness or feel like a hug. Sometimes it's simply letting someone see what you never threw away, even when they thought you had every reason to. A week passed quietly, like pages turning in an old book. Lily stayed. Not every night, but most. Sometimes she'd leave for a few hours, to clear her head, she said, and return before sunset, always looking a little more present than the day before. We didn't talk about everything. Some wounds, I'd learned, needed time to scab over before they could be touched. But there was a rhythm now. Not quite what we once had, but something new, something slower, more careful. One evening, I found her in the hallway by the mirror. She was holding the small bottle of lavender water, the same one she once joked about, the one that had sparked a round of laughter and a quiet ache in my chest that lingered for months. She looked at me through the reflection. "I used to hate this smell," she said. "Now, I'm not sure why." I stepped beside her. "It smells like memory," I said. "People run from what they don't understand. Sometimes that means running from where they come from." She turned the bottle in her hand thoughtfully, then dabbed a little on her wrist. "I don't smell oldness," she said after a moment. "I smell you." And that, those few simple words, meant more to me than any apology ever could. That night she helped me in the garden. We worked until twilight, pulling weeds, planting late summer mums, and trimming back the roses. Her hands were clumsy with the shears, but she listened, watched, asked questions. There was a moment. As she knelt beside me in the soil, her hair falling loose around her face, the scent of lavender rising softly in the evening air. When I looked at her not as the girl who had wounded me, but as the woman still trying to find her way back. "You've changed," I said quietly. She looked up, eyes uncertain. "Is that a good thing?" "It's a beginning," I said. Later, we sat on the porch with 2 cups of tea, the lavender drifting between us like a quiet truce. She didn't talk much, and I didn't press her, but before she went to bed, she paused at her door and turned to me. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up." I smiled gently. Some things, some people, are worth waiting for. And then she disappeared into her room, leaving the scent of lavender behind in the hallway. A scent, this time, that no longer smelled like age, but like home. Some mornings came with conversation, others didn't, and that was fine. Not every healing needs to be spoken aloud to be real. Lily and I moved around each other gently, like dancers learning an old waltz neither of us remembered fully, yet still somehow finding the beat. One gray morning, rain tapped against the kitchen windows. I made oatmeal the way she used to like it. A little cinnamon, too much brown sugar. She smiled when she tasted it, a memory flickering in her eyes, but said nothing. That was our way now. Quiet acknowledgments, soft offerings in place of grand gestures. But there was one thing still untouched between us. One sharp corner we both tiptoed around. Christmas. The day it all changed. The day I'd been reduced to a punchline. The room full of laughter, the burning shame, the ache in my throat I swallowed with a smile. We never talked about it. Until today. Lily sat at the kitchen table, swirling her spoon through the last bit of oatmeal, then looked up. "Do you remember what I said to you that day?" she asked. I met her eyes. "Yes. And you didn't say anything back." There was nothing I could say that wouldn't make it worse. She nodded slowly, lips pressed together. "I thought I was being clever," she said, "trying to seem cool in front of everyone. I didn't realize I hurt you." I watched the steam curl from my cup. "You didn't just hurt me," I said gently. "You taught everyone else in that room it was okay to laugh at me too." Her face paled. "I'm sorry." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "I know." A beat of silence passed. "I think," I continued, "what hurt most wasn't the joke. It was that you never looked back. Not once. You didn't see me walk away." She wiped at her cheek quickly. I was ashamed. I've been ashamed every day since." I gave her hand a soft squeeze. "And yet you came back." She nodded. "Because I realized something." "What's that? That the people who let you love them quietly are the ones who deserve to be loved loudly." We didn't say anything after that. We didn't need to, because some wounds, once acknowledged, begin to close. And in that little kitchen, with the rain outside and the scent of cinnamon in the air, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not forgiveness, but understanding. And that was enough to make the rest possible. It was one of those late autumn afternoons that came with gold-tipped leaves and air that smelled faintly of firewood. The house had grown quieter again, not with absence, but with peace. Lily and I spoke less, but when we did, it was without tension. She no longer hovered in guilt, and I no longer waited for her to prove she cared. We had, in our own way, made it through the storm. That day, I decided to clean out the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, the one I hadn't touched in years. It was full of scarves, silk ones, wool ones, handmade ones from Christmases long ago. Colors faded, edges worn. Each one held a memory. I pulled out a lavender scarf, the one I wore almost daily when Lily was small. She used to wrap it around her neck and say, "Look, Grandma, I'm you now." I would laugh and tug it off her, and she'd squeal and run down the hallway. I didn't realize she'd come in until I felt her standing at the doorway. She walked over slowly and sat beside me on the floor. "I remember that one," she said, touching the lavender scarf gently. "So do I." She helped me fold them one by one. Some sparked stories, others only silence, but there was no sadness this time, only softness. At the bottom of the drawer, folded carefully, was a small envelope. Lily picked it up and glanced at me for permission. I nodded. Inside was a letter I had written but never sent. To her. She unfolded it and began reading. Her hands trembled. In it, I had written everything I never said that Christmas night. The hurt, the humiliation, the silence that followed. But I had also written that I still believed in her. That even in her cruelty, I saw someone worth loving. That I would wait, not forever, but long enough, for the girl I raised to come back to me. When she finished, she wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry you ever had to write that," she whispered. "I'm not," I said. "Sometimes we write things we're not ready to say, and sometimes people aren't ready to hear them." She folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. "Can I keep this?" I nodded, and for the first time since she returned, she leaned into me. Not from guilt, but from something purer. Trust. There on the bedroom floor, surrounded by scarves and memories, we sat in silence, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like something whole. The house had settled into a rhythm again, not unlike the ticking of an old clock, steady, patient, forgiving of time lost. Lily had begun helping more around the house. Not because I asked, but because she wanted to. She swept the porch, refilled the bird feeder, and even attempted one of my soup recipes, though she burned the carrots and oversalted the broth. We ate it anyway, together. One afternoon, as the wind picked up outside and scattered dry leaves across the walkway, I heard her calling from the hallway. "Grandma." I walked over, drying my hands on a dish towel. "Can I go into your sewing room?" she asked. "I remember sitting on the floor there, when I was little." I gave her a small nod. Of course. She opened the door slowly, as though afraid the room might have disappeared. But it hadn't. It was just as she left it years ago. Organized chaos, piles of fabric, half-finished quilts, buttons in jam jars, pins stuck carefully into a soft velvet tomato. She stepped inside and looked around, as if breathing it all in. "I used to think this room was boring," she said with a half-smile. "All those hours you spent in here sewing. I never understood it." "You weren't supposed to," I said gently. "Back then, you thought life was what happened outside these walls." She nodded, touching a folded quilt on the chair. "Now I think this is the only room that felt safe There was a long pause. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, and stared at the patterns on the wall. I remember laughing once, loudly, when you told someone that sewing calmed your nerves. I said something like, "What's so stressful about being old?" I remembered, and I remembered the silence that followed. She looked up at me. "I didn't know then that you were carrying so much. Alone." I walked to the fabric shelf, ran my fingers across the cotton rolls, and pulled one down. Soft purple flowers on a pale gray background. I handed it to her. "Then help me start something new," I said. "A quilt for the guest room." She looked surprised. "Really? Really? You've come back. Let's stitch something into this place that belongs to you now. Not the girl who laughed, but the woman who understands." She held the fabric close, and for the first time, that little room, once dismissed, once laughed at, became something else entirely, a beginning. The days grew shorter, and so did the silence between us. Lily had stayed longer than I thought she would. Longer, perhaps, than she thought she'd be allowed. But I hadn't asked her to leave. Not once. We had found something steady here, like a slow-burning ember that neither of us wanted to smother. One evening, as I was preparing tea, she stood by the window, staring at the street. "Do you remember what I said that day?" she asked without turning. "The exact words?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. She did it for me. "Grandma, you smell like old age." She exhaled slowly, like the memory still stung her tongue. I thought it was harmless, a joke. But now, I hear those words in my own head when I try to fall asleep, like they're following me. I set the kettle down and walked over. "They don't follow you," I said softly. "They wait. Until you're ready to do something with them." She turned then. Her eyes were tired, honest. "I'm sorry," she said again, more to herself than to me. "I know," I said, "but that moment changed something. You can't go back to the girl you were, and neither can I." Lily nodded. "I think that's what scares me." "Then maybe it's time to stop being scared," I said, "and time to see what's been waiting for you all along." That night, she left for a few hours, said she needed to clear her head. I didn't ask where she went. While she was gone, I walked into the guest room, her room now, and opened the closet. It was still mostly empty, save for a few of her things, but something inside me felt final. Not in a sad way, in a resolved way. I opened the drawer where I'd kept her scarf, the one she used to wear like mine, and instead placed something new, a photo of us in the garden from the week before, both smiling, both covered in soil and laughter, and beside it I left a key, not to the house, she already had one, but to the little box on my bedroom shelf, the one that held letters, old ones, new ones, and one I hadn't written yet, the one that would one day be hers to read. When she came back later that night, I opened the door with a smile. She stepped inside, looked around, then paused. "I don't remember leaving anything behind," she said, and I answered simply, "You didn't, but something was always waiting for you here." What she found in her place wasn't punishment, wasn't shame. It was a space, warm and ready, stitched together from love, time, and everything she thought she'd lost. It was the first snowy morning of the season. Light flakes danced against the kitchen window, the kind that don't stick, but still make the world feel quiet, hushed, like everything is listening. I was making cornbread, the old recipe, the one that crumbled too much but always made the house smell like home, when I heard her in the other room. The hallway creaked, then silence, then her voice soft. "Grandma?" I turned. She was standing at the doorway holding the wooden box from my bedroom shelf, the one with the letters, the one I hadn't expected her to open. Not yet. "I saw the key," she said. "I didn't think you'd mind." I didn't. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out a folded page. This one. Was it about me? I took it gently, my fingers brushing hers. I recognized the paper, my handwriting, a letter I had written months ago, maybe longer, one I never meant to give her, but maybe I had left the key out for a reason. Yes, I said, but not the way you think. She sat at the table, eyes wide. Can you read it to me? I hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of the words. Then I unfolded the page and read aloud. Dear Lily, if you ever find this, it means you came back. Not just to my house, but to yourself. The girl I loved, the one who once made me necklaces out of paper clips and believed I could make the stars come closer just by wishing. You hurt me, yes, but I never stopped loving you, not even for a moment. I waited, quietly, patiently, because I knew the world would one day show you what I never could with lectures or discipline. It would show you that kindness doesn't come with applause, that love isn't always loud, that the people who carry us through our worst don't always look like heroes. Sometimes they look like grandmothers in worn slippers with trembling hands. If you're reading this, you're already healing. And so am I. Love, always. Grandma. When I finished, Lily was silent. A tear slid down her cheek. I didn't know I needed to hear that, she whispered. You did, I said gently, and I needed to say it. She folded the letter slowly and placed it back into the box. But before she closed the lid, she reached across the table and took my hand in hers. I think I'm ready to stop running now, she said. And for the first time since she'd walked back into my life, I believed her. By the end of the month, Lily had begun to call it her room. Not the guest room, not that back room, her room. And I let her. Because that's what it had become, not just a space to rest her head, but a piece of her she'd reclaimed. She changed the curtains, brought in a plant, rearranged the books on the shelf I hadn't touched in years, and every small thing she did with care, as if trying to give the space the love she once withheld from me. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, she appeared in the doorway holding an old dress of mine, the blue one with little white flowers, the one I wore in the only photo she had framed in her room. Do you still wear this? She asked. I chuckled. Only in dreams. She held it up against herself. Can I keep it? Of course, I said. It suits you better now. She beamed, not with vanity, but with something softer, like she was trying on a version of herself she'd never dared to be before. That evening, we sat on the porch, wrapped in shawls, sipping warm cider. The sky blushed orange before fading into night. You know, she said, I used to think coming back here meant failure. And now, she thought for a moment, now I think it saved me. I nodded. It saved me too. She reached over and placed her hand over mine. It was warm, steady. I used to think you were just old, she said, but you're not. You're strong, stronger than I've ever been. I smiled. Strength doesn't always shout, Lily. Sometimes it just stays. And that night, as she turned in for bed, I watched her close the door to her room, slowly, like she was tucking herself into something safe. When I passed the hallway later, I paused outside. From inside, I heard the faint sound of humming, a melody I used to sing when she was small. She had remembered. I closed my eyes for a moment, because what she had once laughed at, the smell, the quiet, the softness of age, had now become the very thing she clung to. And as I stood there, I realized something simple and undeniable. She had returned to the place she once tried to erase, and filled it with herself again, not as a guest, but as my granddaughter. Thanksgiving came quietly that year. No big crowds, no loud cousins, no folding chairs in the hallway, just the two of us. And that felt like enough. Lily helped with everything. The stuffing, the pie, even the cranberry sauce, which she claimed to hate but made anyway. She'd always been like that, stubborn, with a soft center. I saw it more clearly now, maybe because she wasn't hiding anymore. We set the table together, just like we used to. Should we light candles? She asked. I smiled. It's not fancy. But it's sacred. she said, and that made me pause. She found the old candlesticks in the drawer and lit them herself. The flames flickered gently in the dim room, dancing on the silverware and casting a glow across her face. When we sat down to eat, she looked at the 2 plates and then pulled out a third, empty, and set it at the end of the table. "For what?" I asked, quietly curious. "For who I used to be," she said. "She needs to see what she missed." "What?" I didn't reply. My throat was thick, full of words that didn't need to be said. We ate slowly. We talked in between bites, about her job, her regrets, her dreams, the ones she had as a child and the ones she'd forgotten until now. I told her stories she'd never heard, about her mother, about her grandfather, about the way our family used to sit around this very table every Sunday night, laughing over peach cobbler and weak coffee. She listened like it all mattered now, and maybe it finally did. After dessert, we sat in silence, watching the candlelight flicker. The 3rd plate remained untouched, but its presence felt right, like it had been waiting all along. "I think I'm finally ready," she said softly. "For what?" "To become someone new." I reached across the table, touched her hand gently. "You already have." She smiled, and for the first time, I saw her. Not just as the girl who once hurt me, but as the woman who had come all the way back from that moment, and sat down at the table of her own making. The 3rd plate stayed until we cleared everything away, not because it had been used, but because it had been seen, just like her. The first snow that stayed fell overnight. When I pulled back the curtain in the morning, the yard was blanketed in white, soft, clean, untouched. It reminded me of starting over, not erasing, no, just rewriting the way forward. Lily was already up, wrapped in her old hoodie, sipping coffee from the mug that used to be mine. She had made enough for both of us without asking. That small gesture felt like a ribbon tied gently around the morning. We didn't speak for a while. We just sat in the quiet of a house that had learned to breathe again. "Do you remember what you said?" she asked suddenly. I looked up. "When I came here a year ago, you opened the door and smiled, and I asked if I could stay the night. You didn't say yes. You didn't say no. You just smiled." I nodded. And I always wondered, why? I sipped my coffee, watching the snow fall outside the window, soft and endless. "Because I wanted you to see," I said, "what was left in your place." She blinked, puzzled. "You mean the room? The bed?" "No," I said gently. "I mean the space, the quiet, the absence, the version of me that lived with your silence, the version of you that walked out the door laughing." Her eyes dropped, and I saw the shame flash in her face again, but I reached out and touched her hand. "You saw it," I said. "You walked in, and you saw what was left." She looked up at me, voice barely a whisper. "And now?" "Now it's filled again. With love, with trust, with forgiveness earned, not begged for, with stories passed down through pie crusts and garden soil and the smell of lavender lingering on her sweater." She stood, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around me, not with desperation, but with presence. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I walked into her room, our room, the one we'd stitched back together with mornings and mended conversations. I turned off the lamp and stood in the doorway and smiled, because what was once left in her place, the ache, the silence, the echo of laughter that cut too deep, had finally been replaced with her. And this time she had come not to apologize, but to stay. A year to the day since she first came back, I found myself standing at the front door again. Same creaky hinges, same chipped paint, but everything else was different. I was different, and so was she. Lily stood beside me, holding a box of holiday lights tangled beyond hope. We laughed, real laughter, as we tried to make sense of it all. She pulled one strand loose, held it up triumphantly. Progress, she said. Story of us, I replied. We didn't decorate the house much that year, just a few warm lights along the windows, a wreath she made from pine and ribbon. Simple, honest, enough. As evening fell, I made tea, not out of habit, but because I wanted to. She set the table, humming softly to herself, a tune I recognized from long ago. When we sat down, I noticed something new by her plate, a key. I raised an eyebrow. She smiled. For you, she said. I picked it up slowly. It was warm from her hands. What does it open? She hesitated, then said, a storage unit. I've been renting it for years, full of things I didn't know where to put, clothes I bought to impress people I didn't care about, notebooks I never filled, pictures I was too ashamed to look at. My heart thudded softly. I don't need them anymore, she said. I want to donate most of it. Maybe burn a few things. She smiled. I want to make room. I looked at the key, then at her. You already have. We ate quietly, peacefully. Later that night, as she got ready for bed, I sat by the fire. I pulled out an old photo album, one she hadn't seen. Inside were pictures of her as a baby, of her mother, of us on front porches through the years. The pages crackled as I turned them. And then I found one I'd forgotten. It was of Lily, 5 years old, sitting in my lap, holding a cookie in one hand and clutching my scarf in the other. Her eyes wide, her smile certain. She had written on the back, "Grandma smells like hugs and cookies." I placed it on the mantel, because in the end, the house didn't need to be filled with people or things to feel full. It needed her presence, her return, her heart. And when she turned off her light and whispered, "Good night, Grandma," down the hallway, not like a guest, but like family, I closed the final door, not to shut anything out, but to keep what matters in.